Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another episode of Double Take. Today's Double Take is two versions of the same story, the Ballad of Narayama, the first one from 1958 by Kinoshita Kaizuki. This is 98 minutes long in colour, and this is the Criterion Region A Blu-ray, and Shohei Imamura's The Ballad of Narayama, or Narayama even, from 1983. This one won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and this is 130 minutes and also in living colour. This is part of the Arrow Shohei Imamura box set from Arrow Academy before Arrow Academy disappeared into the hinterland. So these are two films essentially telling the same story. The Imamura version inserts other characters from other stories, but it's essentially the same tale of mid-19th century Japan, under the Mount Narayama in the town or village of Narayama out in the middle of nowhere. And when somebody is 70 or 70, they get taken up the mountain to essentially die. It's pretty much the Japanese folk tale of Logan's Run, but obviously in Logan's Run it was 30 people ascended, spoiler alert, to their death, but it's just interesting as far as the two versions of the film. Now the 1958 version, which I may have actually done a random review on a long time ago, I can't actually remember, because I've got quite a few videos and my brain is very small. This one is far more expressionistic. It's mostly studio bound. It has a kind of Kobayashi Kaidan feel to it, even though that came after this film, but might have actually been an inspiration on Kobayashi, because when you watch it again it's very stylised, it's very colourful, and again it's shorter, it's more streamlined, whereas Imamura's is more realistic, it's more grim, it's certainly more brutal, it's certainly more sexually explicit. But again, it's interesting to see obviously what you could get away with in 1958 opposed to what you can get with in films in 1983. So obviously the visual content of Imamura's version is stronger. The character, or there's a character who has gets a bit frisky with the neighbouring family's dog, for example, which you couldn't get away with in 1958. So it focuses on the last year of a woman who is 69, who obviously will be 70, and she is trying to get her house in order essentially before she gets taken up the mountain. It obviously draws parallels to how cultures treat their old people. Some cultures kind of live in the same house or nearby to their parents and their grandparents, other cultures try and get rid of their parents and grandparents as quickly as possible, or shuffle them off to cold and uncaring care facilities and old folks' homes at the quickest sign of dementia or illness. And this is, you could argue, is this a more humane way? Everybody just agrees to take them up the mountain and leave them. Obviously in the Imamura's version we kind of see, well, in both versions we kind of see what's at the top of the mountain. And again, perhaps the Imamura one is more bleak in scale, but in general his film is more brutal. For me, I actually prefer the 1958 version, even though again it's a stylized, not necessarily romanticized, because it's certainly not romanticized, but it's certainly less brutal. But for me, the characters in the 83 Imamura film aren't quite as engaging. There's more going on, there's more subplots. Again, the character who does like to have sex with the neighbour's dog, he is an insert, if you'll pardon the pun, into the story. He's from another kind of folk tale or another short story. But in this, he is the second son of the character who is going to be taken up the mountain to die, and he has a bit of a body odour problem. He's perhaps a little bit slow, so he is desperate for release one way or another, and that's why the neighbour's dog. And everybody doesn't like him and avoids him. There's a subplot about one of the men in the village dies, and his last wish to somehow repair his sins is for his wife to make herself available to all the other men, but even she doesn't go as far as the smelly one. So again, it does have, it shows Japan's attitude to women at the time. The men were kind of to be paired off and married, and the women were pretty much just to be given to other men, essentially. So you could argue, well, for me at least, at 130 minutes, the Imamura version is perhaps got too much going on. The characters aren't as engaging. There's too many subplots going on, but it's still a very good film. But I kind of prefer the more stylized, shorter 1958 version, but they're still really good films. And as I said, the Imamura one won the Palme d'Or that year, 1983. Is that not the year of L'Argent by Bresson? Interesting. But again, the basic crux is about how we deal with our elderly. Now, the character is happy to go up the mountain. As I said, she's trying to organise everything so she can go up without concerns. Obviously, there's other older people that aren't too keen in being dropped up a mountain, especially when the snow comes. And again, that's shown more brutally in the Imamura version, as a son carries his father up, and not very hilarious things happen. So again, it will be pretty much your choice whether you prefer that one or that one. It's funny because usually I prefer the kind of more realistic, the more brutal, the more bleak. But in this case, I do actually prefer the 1958 more stylised, more unrealistic film. Both films have this family in the village that's been stealing crops and things like that. And again, in the Imamura 1983 version, they're dealt somewhat more harshly than the 1958 film. So again, it's always interesting to see how different filmmakers approach the same material, but it's also interesting how they approach it as far as what can we get away with. Because as I said, obviously you can't show the nudity and sexual content of the 1983 version in the 1958 version. But it's also interesting that certainly in the UK, in this Blu-ray set, this is rated a 15 certificate in the 83 version, whereas certainly I'm sure at the time it would have been a stone cold 18. So again, it's interesting to see just how far we've come or not come as far as certification and showing sexual content, because I'm sure generally sex with animals would automatically be an 18, whereas now it's only a 15. It is a lovely looking dog, but that's not really the point. So thanks so much for watching this double take on the Ballad of Narayama from 1958 and 1983. Please tell me in the comments which version you prefer, or maybe you like both of them equally. So thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you'll join me again for more double takes. This is Soldier Ronan from Soldier Ronan Films, saying farewell.